So, welcome back to Kdog'S Movies. We just finished the summer movie camp, so now we're going to go into another chapter. We're going to go into a different direction. Now we're going to go focus on two things: classics and physical media. Particularly a certain physical media distributor. That's right, and you've seen me do this in the past videos, talk about films that are available on the Criterion collection. So specifically this time around, we're going to take a look at classic films, like Hollywood classics, like actual classics, like what we're going to show tonight. We're going to show a couple films that I have slated for this weekend. It is Labor Day weekend. So I have slated for, or programmed for you, to check out a couple films that are available on the Criterion collection. We're going to start things off with Double Indemnity from 1944. Yeah, this is going to be the first one. Starring Fred MacMurray, Barbara Stanwyck, and Edward G. Robinson. Yeah, and these, of course, are available on the Criterion collection. So we're doing a specific video about the Criterion collection, because every once in a while you see me pull and talk about a movie that's available in the collection. So, as we know, that the Criterion collection is a premium home video distribution home video distributor. So they get the licenses from major Hollywood films, foreign films, and so forth, and they put them into the Criterion collection and give them the best transfers, best special features. And the original concept when Criterion was developed, it was developed back in the 70s or 80s, I forget, whenever home video first came about, and the Criterion collection was exclusively distributing films on Laserdisc originally. And so you would have these huge blockbuster films that appeared a part of the Criterion collection. They would get the rights to them, like movies like Ghostbusters and Close Encounters, that's just to name a few. So, but then they started branching out into the foreign films, so films like Seven Samurai, Hidden Fortress, which are Akira Kurosawa films that are available on the Criterion collection, as well as Charlie Chaplin movies. There's also some foreign films from like the French New Wave. Francois Truffaut. He's got there's a few films of his that are in the Criterion collection. So, reason why I wanted to be specific with this one, and it's classic Hollywood classics. So, like I said, this first one's going to be Double Indemnity, with Fred MacMurray, Barbara Stanwyck, and Edward G. Robinson, directed by Billy Wilder. And the reason being is because I got really hooked into classics, and I thought, who is the best? Criterion is probably the best to put out these classic films. And you know what? And because of that, other distributors have followed suit. And because you have the Criterion collection, which, let's be honest, is it's not cheap. And the only retailer that I know of that sells it, that you could go like a brick and mortar store, is Barnes and Noble. And where I live, that's kind of difficult. The nearest one is either Fort Wayne or Indianapolis, and even Barnes & Noble's kind of redone some things, so they're not focusing so much on movies and entertainment as much as they are focusing on books. And there's nothing wrong with books. books and games is what they really want to focus on, and that's great. That's fine. But us physical media people, we love our entertainment. But however, there are two other ways that you can purchase these films. Is one, Amazon, always Amazon, and the other is Criterion's own website. That's right, Criterion has the website that you can actually purchase these films. Now you're going to be paying the Barnes & Noble price, unfortunately. It is a little bit cheaper through the Amazon way, but just to help you out. So, we're going to take a look at this film from 1944. Yeah. Directed by Billy Wilder, Barbara Stanwyck, Fred MacMurray, Edward G. Robinson, and one of the early noir films. Yeah, available on the Criterion Collection is Spine number 1126. Originally released by Paramount Pictures, this film has been acquired by Universal Pictures. So here is Double Indemnity. So that was Double Indemnity from 1944, originally released by Paramount Pictures, has been since acquired by Universal Pictures. Directed by Billy Wilder, starring Fred MacMurray, Barbara Stanwyck, and Edward G. Robinson. Now, this was not the first film noir. As a film was playing and the story was unfolding, I actually looked up film noir. Now, you know, what was there's really no definite answer to what was the first film. Some people have pointed out that it was, it goes back to maybe The Maltese Falcon or, you know, films of the 1930s, but this was the path that crime films were taking in the 1930s and 40s and as late as the 1950s. And with this film became a staple of what was called film noir because it was the first film to feature what was called the femme fatale, in which the main character of the film, played by Barbara Stanwyck, she is the one who commits the crime. Mostly commits the crime. Phyllis Dietrichson is her character's name in this film. When the film opens up, it opens up with Fred MacMurray as Walter Neff. He's this insurance salesman who notices that one of his clients has one of his insurance policies is about to lapse, and it's insurance policies on automobiles, and so he's about ready to. So he shows up to the house, the Dietrichson house, to inform Mr. Dietrichson that his insurance policies on his automobiles are about ready to lapse, unless he decides to, you know, sign a new contract, and if he would pay the same amount and he would be covered. But instead, when he shows up to the house, he sees Mrs. Dietrichson, played by Barbara Stanwyck, and he informs her the whole thing, and immediately he becomes attracted to Mrs. Dietrichson, and they coax him into signing a life insurance policy. And of course, Mr. Dietrichson we established, is a is early established that he's a traveling businessman. So he goes from all over the place, and so he's constantly traveling. And that he was married once before. And so, spoiler alert, because of the affair that is taking place between Mrs. Dietrichson and Walter Neff, they set up to where he signs for the life insurance policy, and they wait a few days for it to actually come into place, and then they plot to murder him. This film, like I said, it has so many. You think that they could almost get by with it until. But this was also back when the film. But this was back before the days of the film rating system. And now, like the film rating system, you know, there's G, PG, PG-13, R, and so on and so forth. Those films the films that we see now, we could have an ending that is very cynical and saying, well, hey, the criminals can get by with this. Back then, they couldn't. They couldn't do that. So there was a lot of film censorship. As a matter of fact, when the scene occurs where they commit the crime, it has occurred off camera. They lock onto Barbara Stanwyck's face, her reaction, and you hear the sound. But you do not see what happens. You know what happens just by looking at her face. And that she is quite satisfied. And like I said, this was the film that started. This was the staple of what film noir was. It wasn't the first one, but it became a staple and the mark what film noir is. And of course, the film the feminine, the feminine fatale whole situation where it's an evil woman who's out to take whatever she can against the will. And so, and this film also had Edward G. Robinson, and Edward G. Robinson was known for playing gangsters, as you know, at this time as well. But he's the one that actually is the straight man in this. He's the one that he figures it all out. He figures it all out. He said, because he immediately works with, because he's the one that's above Fred MacMurray's character, so he knows what's going on here. And so he's like, you know, what if it's the woman, she's wanting to take the money, and so she sets it up to where, of course, she doesn't act alone. And so that was the key thing. What if they found him on the railroad tracks with the crutches, and so yeah, it just, they think that they're going to get by with it, and then it just cracks and cracks and cracks at the seams. And of course, at the time, in a movie like this, they had to have that. There had to be some moral message that you think you're going to get away with it? Think again. So, yeah. So that was Double Indemnity. Very entertaining film, I gotta say. It's, of course, it does, even though it has the message that crime doesn't pay, it does have the message it does have an ending that's not very happy. I mean, it just kind of stops. I mean, the deed is done and they have to pay the toll. You know, it just stops. So, with that film, let's continue on to the next one, because it was made 2 years later. So we're continuing on with these classics from that are on the Criterion collection. So this film is another staple in film noir. This one is from 2 years later, directed by Charles Vidor, starring Glenn Ford, George McCready, Joseph Salina. It is, and this is a certain. This film was a key component to another film that would be an influential film of the 1990s. It is Rita Hayworth in Gilda. Yes, from 1946, released by Columbia Pictures. This is Gilda, and of course in the Criterion collection it is spine number 795. Of course, with the Criterion collection, a key thing about collecting them is the spine numbers. So, and of course, if you go on to Criterion's YouTube channel, they have what's called the closet picks, in which like somebody famous or somebody that's just released a project, they go into the Criterion closet, and several of the female people, they see pink spine. So this is Gilda from 1946, starring Rita Hayworth. Of course, Glenn Ford is in it as well. This film was a key component to the 1994 film The Shawshank Redemption. Matter of fact, the original Stephen King short story to that was called Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption. And so, as we'll see with the film, there's a key scene that was heavily inspired into that film. And of course they show it in the film. So, let's turn the lights back off, refill your drinks, refill your popcorn, as we take a look at Gilda from 1946, released by Columbia Pictures, directed by Charles Vidor. So Gilda, are you decent? Which is the iconic line from the movie Gilda, which we just watched. Came out in 1946, and of course the story is about Argentina right after World War II. This kingpin has a little gambling facility, and he hires Glenn Ford to be his servant to protect the facility. And of course, what adds the cog in the wheel is Gilda, is that we know that Gilda and Johnny, aka Glenn Ford, have once had a romantic relationship. And of course, then it sets up to how the husband ends up getting arrested, and to avoid, or actually he's not getting arrested, but he's avoiding getting arrested, and faces suicide. Well, of course, we just saw the film, and so we know that he doesn't do that, and so he's come back to claim Gilda. So it's this really strange third, lovers triangle of two men going for the women or the woman. And of course, this is a bizarre movie, I gotta say, because definitely you would not be able to make a film like this today unless you had repercussions for Glenn Ford's character. Just the way he treats Gilda. This was back in the days when they depict that it was okay to hit somebody, let alone a female. But there's also some other things in there that I think there's a special feature on this edition with TCM host Eddie Muller, and this is one of his favorite movies that he loves to show on TCM, and he did a piece for this Criterion release and talking about some of the context of what the film was and how they kind of snuck in this, like I said, it's a lover's triangle, but I don't know. I mean, possibly that the two men were, I have no idea. I look at it very subjectively, that it's employer to employee, more business oriented. But he points out there's certain lines that say that "let's go home" or what. That's something that what couples would say. But I don't know. It's hard to say that for the time, because definitely, like I said with the previous film, is that censorship was very, very heavy at this time. There was no rating system to where you could just openly do these things and get a rating or whatever. You were censored, and you had to be extremely careful how you said things, how you portrayed things, how you showed them. So it's hard to say about what was going on with Gilda, and he also points out that maybe that the audiences back in 1946 weren't looking for something like that, and I don't think so either. It's all on how you look at it, but I just look at it as, the owner, the criminal owner of the nightclub, and the employee, and the wife. And that the wife and the employee had a relationship, and obviously something happened. They have a past, and so by the end of the movie, it pans out one way. But yeah, that was Gilda from 1946. Sorry, it's late. But of course you see that this reason why why Stephen King chose Rita Hayworth to be the center point of the Shawshank Redemption, because there's that scene in Shawshank Redemption where they're watching Gilda on screen, and they're just showing up just to see her do that one scene where she whips her hair back and says "me," and yeah. So that was Gilda from 1946, spine number 795 in the Criterion collection. So stay tuned. We will have another film coming up very shortly. So continuing on with the classics from the Criterion collection. So our next film we're going to take a look at is from 1953. It is a Samuel Fuller production, or directed by Samuel Fuller, starring Richard Widmark, Gene Peters, Thelma Ritter. It is Pickup on South Street. Yeah, from 1953, originally released by 20th Century Fox. It's a film about pickpockets. This is not a film noir, per se. It's just a classic film. So, let's don the lights, grab popcorn, grab snacks, or whatever you want. So here is Pickup on South Street. And of course, coming from the Criterion Collection, it is spine number 224. So, yeah, let's check out Pickup on South Street. Okay, so Pickup on South Street. This is an interesting film because obviously this film was made in the 1950s, and it was right in the middle of the the height of the Cold War was at its hottest, pardon the pun, but because obviously there's the story is about pickpockets mixing with communism, and because in the story the film opens on a New York subway. As you can see, it's crowded. People are coming and going, getting on and off the train, and it's they're just butting up against each other. It's very, very crowded, and we meet our pickpocket, Richard Widmark. He plays the character of of Skip. I'm already forgetting the names. He plays the character of Skip, and so he is looking around to see who he can target, who he can who he can take advantage of, and so he sees Gene Peters, who plays the character of Candy, and he goes, easy. And so he's got a newspaper in his hand, and he opens up her purse and takes out takes something out of her purse. And then when the train stops, of course, it thrusts everybody forward, and that closes her purse. And we see two other guys that are on the train with her, or with them. And he's watching the whole thing. They're watching the whole thing. And as it turns out, Candy is in possession of some microfilm and is to be handed off to these two communist guys. I don't know what you want to call them, but communist agents, because it contains some information. And while Skip, he's just wanting to, take money. He's whatever he can that's of value. And Candy goes to make a phone call. She realizes that, oh my gosh, what I have is missing. She and her brother is working with these guys because he's the one that got the information in this microfilm. But then that gets Skip involved by wanting to see why, because they start finding him and harassing him. Like the cops show up, and Candy shows up to his shack several times. She goes, "Where's the film? Where's the film?" And so he's like, "What is everybody so uptight about this film?" And so he goes to the library, and you could do this back in those days, is that you wanted to look at a newspaper archive that was printed on film. so you could like read old articles or whatever. And so he goes to the public library, signs out that he wants to look at the newspaper on such and such date, and he while the librarian has their back turned, he readjusts the machine to put this microfilm into the viewer, and he sees what's on it, and quickly, you know, leaves the premises. And so, thus beginning the scenario of we gotta catch the guy. And there's also this pickpocket hit person. Her name is Mo. She works with the police. She's a former pickpocket, but is working with the police and like showing how things work. And she's played by Thelma Ritter. And she's like what they would do in Vegas now, like, you know, like former cheats and stuff like that, you know, spying on cheaters. Well, she's kind of like the former pickpocket who she's kind of the former pickpocket that picks up on the traits of all the pickpockets in New York City, and she's written them down in the book, like she knows on how they operate. And what also is interesting about this, it develops into this love story, this strange love story between Skip and Candy. She finds herself falling in love with Skip, even though it's her brother that's the communist, and she's trying to help him, but it becomes toxic and abusive towards her that she decides to go with Skip and help him out, because at the end Skip is the one who eventually turns over the brother to be arrested for being. But the cops are still, but at the end of the film, the cops are still wanting Skip because of him being a pickpocket. And it's an interesting story, but it's a perfect story for that time. I don't know how well it did financially at the box office for the time, but definitely it's a film that was a product of the time. It has that kind of the forbidden fruit, like you have the girl she's also cooperating with the police, but say, hey, my brother's a communist, and it's and they're like, hey, we need you to follow through with the plans, hand the film off so we can catch these people. It's really bizarre, because like when I first put this in, because I hadn't been able to sit down and watch it until just recently, but when you first see Skip and Candy meet, and there's a bonus feature on here with Samuel Fuller as he's talking about the opening scene of the film, and it's almost, not quite, but it's almost sexual, how he portrayed that opening scene. And between the meeting of Candy and Skip in the first scene. Because in a way, he is violating her, and she doesn't know it, and just by the look in her eyes, it's a little creepy. Just the way, because here's this guy, he's violating her in some degree, and she doesn't know it. That's what I. But then when you see it play out, it's how those two met, and it goes around and comes back for them actually hooking up, and who knows what happened to the rest of their lives. You know, Samuel Fuller didn't go that far. But yeah, that is Pick Up on South Street. It, of course, is Labor Day weekend, so got to go meet up with the family, and hopefully I'll be back with another feature. Okay, so we're going to go into the final segment of this video. We're going to do two films back to back. So just to kind of close out this video, and we're going to do two films that are actually by the same people behind it. We're going to take a look at one film that came first, and then the follow-up that happened. And the follow-up was not as successful financially, but has garnered kind of a following over the years, especially in this political climate. So, but the first one we're going to take a look at is from 1954, and it is Marlon Brando in one of his most classic roles. Also starring Carl Malden, Lee J. Cobb, Rod Steiger, and introducing Eva Marie Saint. It is On the Waterfront. Yeah, from Columbia Pictures in 1954. And this is spine number 647. If you can see it. Yeah, this part of the Criterion collection. So yeah, directed by Elia Kazan, written by Bud Schulberg. And so we'll put this in and watch it, and we'll talk about it afterwards. So gather around, because from 1954, On the Waterfront. Okay, so that was On the Waterfront from 1954, directed by Elia Kazan, produced by Sam Spiegel, and of course with the screenplay by Bud Schulberg. The film opens up with Marlon Brando, who's he's a former prize fighter who has been blacklisted due to the fact that he purposely lost a match, and he ends up working for this mob boss by the name of Johnny Friendly, played by Lee J. Cobb. Johnny Friendly he's in charge, he's the boss over the labor union as a longshoreman. So they're on the waterfront, and due to certain, that the boss can pick and choose who goes to work that day. And Terry is involved with this, is the setup of a man by the name of Joey to be executed. And Joey raised pigeons, and so he lures him to saying, well, I think I found one of your pigeons, and you need to come down and get him, or go up to your rooftop to get him. And while there's a couple of mob hitmen up on top of the roof, and they throw him off. And there's also this priest, played by Carl Malden, Father Pete Berry. He knows what's going on, and he's been speaking out for years against Johnny Friendly, and he keeps telling the workers that you know, Johnny has been using you. He's eventually going to do the same to you, what he did to Joey, blah, 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 blah. And there's also Johnny, or Joey's sister, which is where Eva Marie Saint comes in to play. That she plays Edie. She eventually finds herself falling in love with Terry and Brando's character, but eventually at some point in time he has to tell Edie that, hey, I didn't commit the murder, but I helped them. And so, and of course with the mob is a big thing. They call it, the Italian mob, they call it a Cosa Nostra, which means to be silent. And so, if you speak out against anything that they say, guess what? You got a target on your back now. And so, by the end of the film, Terry ends up testifying in court of the things that he has done. And some of Friendly's thugs at the tail end of the film try to get rid of Terry, but that doesn't happen, and he's able to prove to them by the end of the film that even though he's beaten up, he still wins the war that would put Johnny Friendly out of business by just simply walking into a warehouse. And that way that the unions, by doing that, it proves that the unions would be taken out of the hands of the mob and be run legit. So, yeah, that was On the Waterfront. So, this came out at a time when McCarthyism was running rampant. And as I had to look up the history of the film, and of course we'll get into the next film, that it wasn't necessarily a follow-up to On the Waterfront, but it was the next time that Kazan and Schulberg would collaborate, but it had a totally different result. But this film was made. Elia Kazan was believed to be a member of the Communist Party, but he did testify, and he ratted out 8 communists who were in the film industry. So he named names. One of them was playwright Arthur Miller, who originally was going to write the screenplay to this, but then was changed to Bud Schulberg, and obviously much better film came about this. And so, and there was also, because of this, he received some criticism amongst peers and so forth, and because I wouldn't say that On the Waterfront is a pro-American film, but it's not exactly pro-American, but it's neither pro-communism either. It rides this line of, hey, everybody has a right to work. We don't need to be taking authority from thugs and mobsters and things like that. So like the people who were like blacklisted, they really criticized Kazan at the time and saying that he had gone to the pro-American side, but it really isn't all that pro-American, nor is it pro-communist or anything like that. It's very much a film that's very pro. It's pro that where this is where it is pro is that everybody has a right to work. Everybody has a right to. They have a right to live, so to speak, and we can't let certain people who have power dictate what we will or will not do. And so in this case it's a mob boss who claims he has all the power in his hands. Not, he doesn't literally say that, but he claims he has all that power. But with Terry, Marlon Brando's character, he's able to take that away from him. So this is a very decent, very, very well-made film, very good film. It won several Academy Awards at its time. It won Best Motion Picture, so it won the highest regard. Won the Best Director, Best Actor for Marlon Brando, and Best Supporting Actress for Eva Marie Saint, as well as Best Story and Screenplay, and several other awards as well. So it's a well noted and cited film and recognized throughout the years. Now, Kazan followed up on the waterfront with East of Eden, which was made with James Dean. And so, but we need to fast forward 3 years later, and that would be the next time that Kazan and Schulberg would collaborate. And this time they wanted to make another somewhat political message. But this one kind of went in the opposite direction in terms of their in terms of accolades and response. It is from 1957. It is A Face in the Crowd. Now, this was originally released by Warner Brothers, and it stars Andy Griffith and Patricia Neal, as well as a young Walter Matthau in an early role for him, and a Lee Remick. And this film takes a look at what would be the threat of television. Now, I'll get into what I think of this film afterwards, but I do want you to kind of check it out. Again, from 1957, starring Andy Griffith, directed by Elia Kazan, screenplay by Bud Schulberg, Face in the Crowd, with the Criterion spine being 970. So, do check it out. Here's A Face in the Crowd. Okay, so that was Face in the Crowd from 1957, directed by Elia Kazan, with the screenplay by Bud Schulberg, starring Andy Griffith, Patricia Neal, Anthony Franciosa, and Lee Remick, and a young Walter Matthau. Now, this was Andy Griffith's first role. This was his first film role. He had never done anything like this, and he was used to doing stand-up comedy and bits and dramas and just overall up-feeling type of stories and performances that, and of course, well, let's get into this. Well, the film is about, the film opens up with Patricia Neal as Marcia. She is the she's the daughter of a radio station owner. She has this program that she airs called A Face in the Crowd, and so she just goes around with her tape recorder and interviews and talks to people. And so she wanders into this jail in which this she runs into this man. You don't know what his name is. They just call him, well, Lonesome. She just calls him Lonesome Rhodes. And so she just gives him the name Lonesome Rhodes. And so he starts singing her this song in the middle of the jail, and they said, because he makes a deal with the jail, they say, hey, if you sing this lady a song, I'll let you out tomorrow morning. And it was just on a drunken misdemeanor, like a really minor charge, you know. And so that's what happens. And so she ends up playing the tape over the radio. Dad likes it so much that, hey, get this guy in here, I'll give him a free radio show. And while immediately when he begins to do this radio show, he has a very powerful presence, even on radio, which was still huge back then. He influences kids to jump into the boss's swimming pool and have all these contests and things like that. And so here comes the next thing. They hear him on the radio. Well, there's a southern TV station that says, hey, I want to put this guy on television. And it leads to that there's this mattress company, hey, we'll sponsor the show, and you know, yeah, so he keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. What eventually leads to him moving to New York City, to, you know, getting a Los Angeles, you know, a New York talent agent, and then he starts endorsing other products. And that one in particular is a product called Vitajex. Now, Vitajex is not a real product, but it's easily depicting what this product does, and it's a Viagra. It's basically Viagra. it's Viagra for the time. So, and of course, what also leads to that is that because he's so popular on television and he's helping to sell this drug, that also leads to possibly he could help endorse a presidential candidate. But it eventually shows that eventually the fame goes to his head, and he goes overboard and starts to, of course, he's over the top to begin with. He's very over the top. He has this laugh that every time Kazan films Andy Griffith, Lonesome Rhodes laughing, it's Lonesome Rhodes, okay, so I'm just going to say Lonesome Rhodes. Lonesome Rhodes laughing, his smile is just engulfing the screen. Not just Lonesome Rhodes, but it's the Lonesome Rhodes smile that, and it's a film that you got to be careful with, and how you could look at this and say, well, that's this politician, that's that politician, because every time I've heard of this being played on Turner Classic Movies, they always have somebody on that guest programs this movie. And it's usually somebody who's a die-hard liberal that loves to show this movie, and they want to pin it on to our current sitting president. I can kind of see that. However, it's a statement not just about politicians, but how it's all kind of intertwined between politics, the media, and the entertainment. How it's all kind of intertwined. And I know that the left, they really love to point to this movie, saying that, well, that every single, like Donald Trump or these certain commentators, these conservative commentators, are like Lonesome Rhodes. That's not always the case. The movie as a general was a statement as a whole that we got to be careful with who we are listening to and allowing to feed us information. It's not just it's politics, it's the media. So yeah, it's the politics, it's the media, it's the entertainment. What's that first word of entertainment? Enter. Entering your mind. And who did I just say is one that requests a lot of this movie to show? Well, usually somebody who's on the radical left. And they're the ones that are in control of the entertainment and the mainstream media. And here's another thing is, like I pointed out with the Vitajex, it's a drug that's for male enhancement. Even though they couldn't say it back in 1957 in a film. They couldn't, but it's quite obvious what they're depicting there. I mean, through a cartoon commercial image, it's quite obvious what is being depicted there. But the film as a statement is a statement as a whole that we need to be careful of what we're allowing in and allowing us to form our ways of thinking. You need to form your own opinion. You need to be a free thinker. Don't let somebody else feed it for you. And so that's neither a left or a right issue, because yes, I pointed out some examples that the left loves to point to this movie, but you need to be careful what's on the right too. Do research. Think for yourself. Don't let anybody else tell you what to think. Now, Schulberg and Kazan were members of the Communist Party, but it eventually turned on them. And that's why they stepped away from it and became a part of the American society and not socialism. Now they are left. Now they were left wing, but which is okay. You can be left. But when you start doing like the socialist stuff, forcing agendas onto people, that's when there's really issue taking place. And where have we seen that recently? Cracker Barrel, Disney, Bud Light, Target. We're in that society, folks. And this film, regardless of how the left likes to point to it, but also I'm going to point to it just as a person of the human society and say, hey, this is a warning to that we can't always trust what is placed in front of us. And that's on both sides. The film didn't do very well. Matter of fact, Andy Griffith has stated that this film was a very very difficult role for him to play. And as you know, that when you watch Andy Griffith, you think, well, here's this all shucks, down home, good old lesson learning Southern Andy Sheriff Taylor, that you think that's what you're going to get when you hear of Andy Griffith. But then you watch Facing the Crowd and go, oh no, this is the exact polar opposite of that. And there's a feature on here that he said that Facing the Crowd was, Andy was not really happy camper making it. He had a really tough time on it, and because it's not who he is. But in some ways, Kazan wanted people to, he wanted his actors to kind of become who they were portraying on screen. And so that's just, I mean, that's the way Marlon Brando was on The Waterfront, and that's the way the Eva Marie Saint was on the Waterfront, and that's the way Patricia Neal is in this film. That's the way Walter Matthau is in this film. It's just, he wanted them to become those people, and so, and that's why really Andy Griffith turned more towards television and going back to his comedy and good-hearted lessons learned stories, rather than do another story like Facing the Crowd. But there's some harsh realities to a Facing the Crowd. So that's going to close out this video. I'll be back with another video. We're going to continue on with classics from Criterion. So there's a lot more films that, at least a few more films that I could talk about. So from me to you, see you later.